I heard my mother's voice through the baby monitor I'd hidden behind the bookshelf 3 weeks ago. Vera would burn through that money in 6 months, she said. You know how she is. Impulsive. Irresponsible. We're not stealing from her, Gary. We're protecting her from herself. I was sitting in the parking lot of a Walgreens 2 blocks from my childhood home, eating a gas station sandwich, listening to my mother explain to my uncle why draining my inheritance account was actually an act of love. I didn't cry. I'd already done that part. What I did was open the Notes app on my phone and type the date, the time, and a single sentence. She said it out loud. Finally. My name is Vera Calloway. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed CPA with a forensic accounting specialty, which means companies hire me to find money that's been hidden, moved, or stolen. I'm very good at it. The irony of my situation was not lost on me, not even for a second. My grandmother, my father's mother, passed away 18 months before that night in the parking lot. She left me her house. Not my mother. Not my uncle. Me. There was a will. There was a probate attorney. There was a notarized document with my name on it, in plain 12-point Times New Roman. My grandmother and I were close in the way that skips a generation sometimes. She taught me to play gin rummy. She called me every Sunday until she couldn't anymore. When she got sick, I drove 4 hours every other weekend to sit with her and watch old game shows. My mother, meanwhile, visited twice in 3 years, both times around the holidays, both times when extended family was present to witness the effort. The house was a 3-bedroom craftsman in a quiet part of Asheville, North Carolina. Paid off, worth somewhere between $400,000 and $420,000, depending on the quarter. My grandmother left it to me with one handwritten note tucked inside the will envelope. You were always the one who showed up, Vera. This is yours. Don't let anyone talk you out of it. I didn't know she'd need to say that. My mother's name is Connie. My stepfather's name is Walt. They had been renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Charlotte for 11 years, which they complained about constantly, which had nothing to do with me, which became their entire justification for what came next. 6 weeks after the will cleared probate, my mother called me. She said they were having trouble making rent. She said it was temporary. She said, could they please stay at the Asheville house while they got back on their feet? Just for a few months, just until Walt's freelance contracts picked back up. I said yes. I said 3 months. I said I'd need them to cover the utilities and basic upkeep. She said, of course. She said I was such a good daughter. She said Grandma Eleanor would be proud. I believed her. That's the part I've had to sit with. Not the anger, not the betrayal. Just the plain, flat fact that I believed her. 3 months became 6. 6 became 12. Every time I asked about a move-out timeline, my mother had a new crisis. Walt's back. A car repair. A mix-up with their bank account that tied up funds for weeks. I kept extending the grace period because that's what you do. That's what I've been trained to do. You don't let family sleep on the street. You don't put your own needs above people who raised you. I wasn't living in the house. I'd taken a job in Denver 18 months earlier, a firm that does forensic audits for mid-size insurance companies. Good salary. Good work. I was renting an apartment near the office and traveling home maybe 4 times a year. The house sat there in Asheville with my family inside it, and I told myself everything was fine. The water started warming, and I didn't notice. The first sign I chose to ignore was the neighbor, Mrs. Messence. Pelham, who lived 2 houses down and had known my grandmother for 30 years, emailed me out of nowhere on a Tuesday morning. She said she hoped I didn't mind her reaching out. She said she'd seen some work being done on the property and wanted to make sure I knew. She said the crew had repainted the front door and replaced the mailbox, and she wasn't sure if that was something I'd authorized. I texted my mother. My mother said she just wanted to freshen things up. She said it was a gift, really. She said the old door was chipping, and it brought the curb appeal down. I didn't ask who paid for it. I should have. The second sign was a piece of mail that got forwarded to my Denver address. Standard mail forwarding from the Asheville house. From a company called Heritage Property Concepts. It was a letter referencing the Calloway Whitmore household and thanking them for their business. I didn't know what Heritage Property Concepts was. I looked it up. It was an interior design firm. I called my mother. She said they'd just gotten some advice. She said they hadn't actually hired anyone. She said she didn't know why they were getting mail from them. I let it go. The third sign I cannot excuse. A friend of mine from college, Tamsin, lives in Asheville. We get coffee when I'm in town. She texted me a photo in March. Not to start anything, she said. Just because she thought I should know. It was a photo of my grandmother's house. There was a sign in the front yard. A wooden sign, the kind you get custom made on Etsy, hung from a little shepherd's hook beside the front walk. It said, the Whitmore home. Walt's last name is Whitmore. I sat with that photo for a long time. I remember I was eating breakfast. I remember I put down my fork. I stared at the sign, at the font they'd chosen, at the little painted wreath around the letters, and I felt something click into place in my chest. Not rage, exactly. Something quieter. The specific silence of finally understanding a thing you'd been refusing to look at. I called in a favor from a colleague who specializes in title research. I asked her to pull everything recorded against the Asheville property in the last 18 months. She called me back in 2 hours. She said I might want to sit down. There was a quitclaim deed on file, recorded 4 months after my family moved in. It transferred ownership of the property from me to my mother, Connie Whitmore. The notary signature on the document was from a mobile notary service based in Buncombe County. My signature, my alleged signature, was on the line. I have never signed a quitclaim deed. I have never been visited by a mobile notary. I have never, not once, consented to transfer ownership of anything to anyone. I sat in my Denver apartment and I looked at a scan of my own forged signature on a legal document, and I thought about how many times I'd said yes when I should have said nothing. I thought about every extension I'd granted, every crisis I'd bankrolled, every time I'd driven 4 hours to sit with my grandmother while my mother posted vacation photos. Then I opened a new spreadsheet. Because I'm a forensic accountant, and when something is broken, I count the pieces. I spent the next 4 months building the case. I did not tell my mother I knew. I did not contact a lawyer. Not yet. I asked questions sideways, the way I do at work, the way you approach a fraud investigation, when you need the subject to keep behaving normally while you document everything. I requested utility records. I requested the full title history. I contacted the mobile notary company and told them I was a client following up on services rendered. They had no record of my name. They had a record of my mother's name as the requesting party. I ordered a certified copy of the deed from the county register. I had it analyzed by a document examiner I use for professional cases. She confirmed within a week the signature was a forgery. The ink age was inconsistent with the recording date. The signature pattern didn't match 3 years of my authentic signatures on file. I found something else, too, while I was in the records. A home equity line of credit, opened 6 months after the fraudulent deed was recorded, in the amount of $65,000, secured against my grandmother's house. My house! My mother had borrowed $65,000 against a property she didn't own, using a deed she'd forged, and she was making payments on it. Payments that would eventually result in a lien if she defaulted, on a home that was still legally mine under the original title, pending any court challenge of the fraudulent transfer. I added that to the spreadsheet. I also found my half-sister. I didn't know I had one, not really. My father left when I was 4. He remarried. I'd met his daughter, her name is Lacey, exactly twice, both times at distant family events when we were children. We'd exchanged numbers a few years ago, out of vague mutual curiosity, and mostly didn't use them. Lacey texted me in August. She said she'd heard some things through family and didn't know if it was her place to say anything. I told her it was absolutely her place. She told me that at a 4th of July cookout, my mother had introduced herself to my father's extended family as the owner of Eleanor's house, had shown people photos of the renovations, and had said, and this was the part that made my hands go cold, that it was a good thing she'd stepped in when she did, because Vera had been in trouble for a while and wasn't capable of managing real property. Trouble. She'd told people I was in trouble. I asked Lacey if she'd be willing to write down what she remembered and sign it. She said yes immediately. She said she'd been waiting for someone to ask. That was the moment I stopped gathering evidence and started building the ending. I flew to Asheville on a Thursday in October. I told no one I was coming. I booked a room at a small inn on the other side of town, paid in cash, used my debit card for incidentals only, nothing that would show up as a notification on any shared account. I had a rolling suitcase with a laptop and 5 tabbed binders, and a manila envelope from the county recorder's office. I met with an attorney on Friday morning. His name is Garrett Osei. He's been doing real estate and civil litigation in Buncombe County for 17 years. He read through my binders in 2 hours. He said it was one of the cleaner fraud cases he'd seen, documentation-wise. He said we had grounds for criminal referral on the deed forgery, the fraudulent HELOC application, and, potentially, the notary fraud. He said we could also pursue civil recovery for the $65,000 and any rental value accrued during unlawful occupation. I asked him what the fastest legal path to reclaiming the property was. He told me, I spent the weekend doing the last piece of preparation. I accessed the smart home system my grandmother had installed 2 years before she passed. A standard hub that controlled the thermostat, the door locks, and the outdoor cameras. My grandmother had put me on the account as an administrator. My mother had never changed that. She'd never thought to look. I updated the camera firmware from the inn on Saturday night. I configured a private recording buffer to a cloud account my mother had no access to. I tested the lock system. Everything was functional. Everything was mine. On Sunday evening, I called my mother. I told her I was coming to visit. I told her I'd be there Monday afternoon, that I just wanted to see the place, walk through it, maybe grab some of the last few things of Grandma's I hadn't taken yet. She sounded pleased. She sounded like she was smiling. She asked if I wanted her to make dinner. I said that would be nice. I drove to the house Monday morning. Not in the afternoon, I parked on a side street 2 blocks away. One I knew from 17 years of visiting my grandmother. I sat in the car with my laptop and a thermos of coffee, and I watched the camera feeds on my screen. My mother left at 9:45. Walt left at 10:20. The house was empty. Garrett's assistant arrived at 10:30 with 2 sheriff's deputies and a court order. The order had been expedited. Garrett had filed Friday afternoon and called in a professional favor. It authorized immediate re-entry based on the documented fraudulent title transfer and directed law enforcement to assist the lawful owner in securing the premises. I walked up to my own front door, my grandmother's front door, with the new paint my mother had chosen without asking me, and I unlocked it with the code I'd reset the night before. The deputy stepped inside first. The assistant photographed everything. The interior renovations, the new furniture, a framed photo on the mantel of my mother and Walt at what appeared to be a wine tasting, posed like it was their home, like they'd always been there. I collected the 3 boxes I'd come for, my grandmother's recipe tin, her button collection and the coffee tin she'd kept on the windowsill since before I was born, a quilt she'd made for my grandfather's old dress shirts. Then I changed all the locks. Then I changed the smart home access codes. Then I revoked every device on the hub except mine. I was back in my car by 1:15. My mother called at 2:40. She'd come home to find the locks changed and a notice on the door. A formal legal notice, prepared by Garrett's office, advising the occupants that they were on a property they did not own and were required to vacate within 7 days per North Carolina statute. She called 3 times in a row. I let her ring. The 4th time, I answered. "What did you do?" she said. It wasn't a question. It was the voice she used when I was 16 and she'd found something she didn't like. Flat and dangerous and preemptively victimized. "I reclaim my property," I said. "You have 7 days. You can't do this. We live here. We have a lease. You don't have a lease, Mom. You have a quitclaim deed with my forged signature on it and a HELOC you took out against a property you don't own." I paused. I've already spoken to the DA's office. The line went quiet. Not silent. I could hear her breathing. I could hear in the background Walt saying something I couldn't make out. "You wouldn't," she finally said. "You wouldn't do that to your own mother." I thought about my grandmother's note. "Don't let anyone talk you out of it." "I already did," I said. 7 days. She started to cry. It was a specific kind of crying, the crying that's meant to be heard, performed more than felt. I recognized it because I'd grown up next to it. Every time I'd wanted something that cost her something, that was the sound I got. "You're making a mistake," she said through the tears. "We were protecting this place. Do you know what would have happened to this house if we hadn't been here? You were in Denver. You weren't watching it. We put money into it. We made it beautiful. And this is how the document examiner's report is in tab 4, I said. The HELOC paperwork is tab 6. If you'd like to review anything before you speak to an attorney, I've left a copy of the complete file with Garrett Osei's office. His number is on the cover page." She stopped crying. "Who?" she said. "My attorney," I said. "Have your attorney call his." I hung up. She didn't call back that evening. Walt did once from his cell. I let it go to voicemail. He said they'd fight this. He said I was being vindictive. He said my grandmother would be disgusted with me. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Garrett. The next morning, Lacey called. She said my mother had reached out to some of our shared extended family, trying to rally support. She said my mother was telling people I'd had some kind of breakdown, that I'd hired a lawyer to steal back the house she'd been caring for, that I was unstable and this was a pattern. I texted Lacey a PDF of the document examiner's report. I said she was welcome to share it. 4 days later, my mother and Walt vacated. They loaded a U-Haul and left without telling me, without returning the spare key they'd cut, without leaving a forwarding address. They did leave the house. They left it in a way that was clearly meant to hurt me. Furniture rearranged, a broken tile in the master bath that hadn't been there before, The garden my grandmother had kept for 20 years pulled up to the dirt in what had to have been a deliberate act. My grandmother's rose bushes, all of them, cut down to stumps. I stood in the backyard and looked at those stumps for a long time. I let myself feel it, not the anger at my mother, but the grief underneath it. The loss of the garden my grandmother had pointed to from her kitchen window every morning, the same one she'd been too sick to tend in her last 2 years, but had never stopped talking about. Then I went inside and I documented everything with photographs and I sent them to Garrett. The criminal referral went to the DA's office 8 weeks later. Garrett had coordinated with the detective handling the notary fraud angle. Apparently my mother wasn't the first client of that mobile notary service to have irregularities in their paperwork, and the DA's office had been building something broader. My case gave them one more clean, well-documented thread. My mother was charged with deed fraud and making false statements in connection with the HELOC application. The bank that issued the HELOC filed their own civil complaint once they understood the chain of title. Walt was charged separately in connection with the HELOC paperwork. He'd signed as a co-applicant, and his signature was on documents that misrepresented ownership. I didn't feel triumphant about the charges. I want to be honest about that. There's a version of this story where I stood in the driveway watching them drive away and felt some clean, cinematic satisfaction. That's not what happened. What happened was, I sat on my grandmother's porch steps for a long time in the cold, and I thought about all the Sunday calls I'd gotten, all the gin rummy, all the hospital visits at the end, and I thought about how none of it had been enough to make my mother see me as a person rather than a resource. That grief doesn't have a legal resolution. The charges don't fix it. The house doesn't fix it. I'm still working on that part. What the house did fix was the practical reality. I flew back to Denver, finished out my lease, and gave notice at my job. The Asheville firm I consulted with during the investigation offered me a position. I took it. I moved back in January. I'm sitting in my grandmother's kitchen as I write this. The rose bushes are coming back. 2 of the 4 showed new growth last month, which the nursery told me was actually possible if the root system survived. I've been watering them every other day. I don't know if they'll fully recover, but they're trying, and I've decided that's enough. People ask me what I wish I'd done differently. They expect me to say I should have never let my mother move in. Maybe that's true, but the thing I actually wish I'd done differently is simpler than that. I wish I'd read my grandmother's note out loud to myself the day I got it. Don't let anyone talk you out of it. I wish I'd understood that she wasn't writing it as a formality. She was writing it because she knew my family, and she knew me, and she knew exactly what was coming. She left me the house. She left me the note. She gave me both of the things I needed. I just took a while to use them. There's a version of myself I used to be, the one who said yes automatically, who extended every deadline, who told herself that keeping the peace was the same thing as being a good person. I don't think she was weak, exactly. I think she was just working with the wrong definition of love. Love, the way I was taught it, meant absorbing, means never making anyone uncomfortable at your own expense. It meant being the daughter who didn't push back, who wired the insurance premiums on time, who drove 4 hours on weekends so an old woman didn't have to be alone, while the people who claimed to love her the most were somewhere else, living their lives, assuming someone else would handle it. I handled it. And then they took what I'd earned from handling it and signed my name on a document I'd never seen. What I've had to reckon with, slowly, is that what my mother did wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a moment of desperation or poor judgment. It was calculated. She found a mobile notary. She recorded the deed. She opened a line of credit. She told people at family cookouts that she'd stepped in to protect me. That's not a mistake. That's a plan, executed over months, by someone who believed I would never look closely enough to catch it. And she was almost right, not because I'm careless, but because I trusted her. That's the part that still sits with me. Not the forgery, not the HELOC, not even the rose bushes she cut down on her way out the door. It's the trust, the specific, irreplaceable trust you place in a parent, that they will not point it back at you like a weapon. But here's what I've also learned. The same qualities that made me vulnerable are the ones that eventually saved me. I showed up. I paid attention. I kept records not out of suspicion, but out of habit, because that's what you do when you care about something. When I finally turned that attention on my own life, the picture was already there. I just had to be willing to look at it. That's the thing about neglecting your own interests for long enough. The damage doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly, the way debt does, the way erosion does. And then, one day you get a photo from a friend, a wooden sign on a shepherd's hook that reads, "The Whitmore Home," and something in you just stops pretending. I'm not glad it happened. I don't think suffering produces wisdom automatically. And I'm skeptical of stories that tie trauma up too neatly at the end. But I do think that who you become on the other side of a hard thing depends almost entirely on what you do with the information it gives you. My mother's choices gave me information I couldn't ignore, so I used it. Methodically, patiently, without anyone asking me to. Garrett told me once during the case that I was one of his easier clients, not because the situation was simple, but because I'd done the work before I walked in the door. I think about that sometimes. I think about my grandmother, who kept records of her own, who wrote a note and tucked it in an envelope, who understood something about the family she'd raised that she hoped I'd eventually understand too. She left me the house. But the note was the real inheritance. Don't let anyone talk you out of it. She wasn't writing about property. She was writing about the habit of knowing your own worth and refusing when it matters most to negotiate it away. The rose bushes are coming back. 2 of the 4. And I've decided that's enough to keep going.